Welcome back to the 11th Annual SISE Conference, Day 2, Session 1. One of my responsibilities as the moderator for the week is to give the audience a quick recap of the highlights of the day before. First of all, we've surpassed 32,000 event engagers. 32,000, George and Thomas, another new SISE record. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Kimberly Miner, spoke of Arctic tipping points and planet tipping points and planetary tipping points and tipping points to watch because systems are changing faster than we thought and that it's time to get to work now. The speakers on the second panel, Mariana Grossman of Minerva Ventures and Dave Johnson of Sarah Architects, helped us think about a systems approach to gigaton scale challenges. But for the purposes of my review, and for the benefit of the audience, I think it's also necessary to do a quick recap of last year's, the 10th annual SISE conference, for reasons you'll soon understand. One of the main conclusions that came out of the 10th annual SISE conference last year was that individual action was not enough. The planet faces gigaton scale challenges and needs gigaton scale solutions. Rather than just individual action, the SISE fellows determined that good energy policy is essential, generally lacking, and desperately needed. In other words, all the work from the SISE last year and most of the presentations this year, at least thus far, point to our next panel on policy. Amy Hart is the Senior Director of Public Policy at Sunrun, and backed by popular demand is James Schulte, Director of Energy Policy for ComEd. I have to tell a quick story. When we held a dry run with Amy and James a few days ago, I tried to give Amy fair warning with a few insights about what to expect. The SISE fellows are brilliant and won't hesitate to ask thoughtful questions. The speakers this year have been highlighting and referencing policy throughout, but haven't yet addressed it. And even last year's speakers focused on policy, but didn't really address it directly either. I'll never forget, Amy, your reply. You smiled and you said, "Bring it on." I knew at that moment that this was going to be a fun panel. Thank you, James, for inviting Amy to join us. So we're going to get started. I'd like to start off with Policy 101 for both of you, Amy and James. Talk a little bit about your companies, but also your jobs, and then followed by, it's a multi-part question, I'll help you remember. So your company, your jobs, and followed by how in the world do you do your jobs? I'll let you start there. How about that, Amy? How's that for a good start?
That sounds great. And thank you, Eric. Good morning, everyone. James, thank you for inviting me as well. Happy to be on a panel with you. And yeah, really happy to be part of what I consider more of a discussion. I'm from Senior Director of Public Policy at Sunrun, and we are the nation's largest residential rooftop solar and storage provider. Lynn Jurick, our CEO, she founded the company in 2007 with Ed Fenster, and 14 years later, we serve well over 500,000 customers in 22 states, including DC and Puerto Rico. That actually translates into 4.1 gigawatts of solar energy capacity in the US, which means we're one of the largest owners of solar assets globally and the top 3 in the US. And so, one of our main perspectives is, look, rooftop solar and residential solar, it may be small on rooftops, but when you have that number, that capacity, it can make a real difference, especially located where communities can benefit the most. And Eric, the comment of "bring it on" often refers to what Lynn's approach to this energy future is, often coming at it from a very humble and open perspective, that we're always driving to figure out what's the next solution, but not to say we have the only solution, or this is it, this is what we know today, but it really is open. So I hope, working, with James, but listening to all of you, hopefully we can take away some good ideas that results in real movement and a clean energy future. So Sunrun, I guess, for the company, we started in rooftop solar, residential solar. We've now added storage and backup battery systems in all of our states for customers for that availability. And now we have nearly 20,000 customers that have installed Brightbox, which is our customer-sited solar and battery solution. And we've seen that this was a small market maybe a few years ago. Maybe it was thought that there's limited benefits, or we didn't know how to tap into the benefits of residential rooftop solar, but now it's mainstream and we recognize that it's necessary for customers to have that reliable power, clean power that can also provide tangible benefits to the grid. So that's what I do every day, is talk about this with legislators, with regulators. Energy policy we work on legislative initiatives, as James knows, and as well as the regulatory space. And that's kind of where the rubber hits the road with a lot of this. I've had the privilege of working in the renewable energy industry for more than 15 years, with work with a nonprofit organization, a municipality, and driving solar, and now in the private sector, and have been at Sunrun for since 2014. And how we get our work done is honestly working with stakeholders. We actually work with a lot of others within the industry, from utility scale solar and wind developers, community solar, down to the residential providers, companies of all kinds, to advance clean energy solutions, and now electrification, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, but also with the stakeholders and the communities that are impacted. And that's where we have found the greatest benefit and the best solutions, is when you actually take the time and work on those, whether it's legislative initiatives or regulatory policy. So I will stop there and turn back to you, but that's really happy to be here with you all today for the conversation.
Thank you, Amy. We've got a few questions already for you. James, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everyone. Great to be back. Thank you, George, Thomas, Eric, Katie, the rest of the crew for having me. I love the best nerds on earth tag, and it's really exciting to see, again, such a great group of young, ambitious, smart, talented, creative people wanting to hustle and make an impact here, because that is the only way we are going to get there. I'm a big believer in the power of human ingenuity and collaboration. And, we got ourselves into this mess, broadly speaking, and together we can get out of it. So exciting to be here. So ComEd is the local electric utility for Northern Illinois. We serve over 4 million customers, homes and apartments, and moms and kids and grandmas, to medium businesses, small businesses to large businesses. So we own and operate an incredibly reliable and resilient grid here, bringing power to everything that we all need, which certainly in this past year and a half has been a lot of power for our computers and our Wi-Fi, right, so that we can keep working and doing things that we're doing as we've struggled through this crisis. And then increasingly, right, is more electrified end uses, EVs, and then integrating it all. We sit at kind of the center of the various systems that stack on top of each other, and a big piece of our mission, to Amy's point, is working with Amy and the Sunruns of the world, so that our customers can get what they want and need as we decarbonize equitably. Two big challenges, right? Decarbonization and doing it in an equitable way, given environmental justice and past disenfranchisement and historic disinvestment. And so it's a complex set of things. The grid itself is complex. It's an amazing invention and pieces of engineering that fit together, and then it fits into all of these other systems, economic systems and social systems, the way we live and work together. So that's ComEd. My job as Director of Energy Policy, very similar to Amy. It's although we have different companies kind of on our business cards, I am working with stakeholders as well. It's a huge piece of what we're doing to really listen to what matters to people and why it matters to them. And because, again, like I said, we're in the middle of things, right? We want to work with everyone, and people have different concerns. So we're trying to be a subject matter expert and a partner as the energy transition goes along. legislative, regulatory, the mix, because there's, you can't, my old boss at Energy Impact Partners likes to say, Hans Kobler, you can't FedEx an electron. The system is the system, and there's a physicality to what we're doing, right? Amy's putting a solar panel on a roof and a battery in a garage, and there's wires that connect those things and bring it to your neighbor's house and bring wind from the Great Plains, right? So there's this physical side that we have to get right, and innovate, and that means new policy and new solutions from governors and mayors and lawmakers and regulators to do things in a different way, so that we can get cleaner energy on the grid. We can make sure that the benefits of solar and other clean technologies are affordable to all customers, not just the really wealthy that can naturally afford it. And those are all policy innovations that kind of stack up to help us with the energy transition, which, as yesterday highlighted, we've got to get going. We've got to speed it up. And that's what I think. I know it gets me out of bed in the morning. I'm sure it gets Amy out of bed in the morning too, is how can I have an impact today on climate change and making sure that we are decarbonizing and electrifying, like I said, in a sustainable, economically sustainable, equitable, just way. So great to be here.
So that's great. And so you both used a phrase, and I was wondering if we could just go a little deeper into it, because for many of us, the policymaking process is, the great metaphor of making sausages, right? It's great in the outcome when it's done well, but you don't want to know how it works. But you both said a phrase, listen to the stakeholders. That's much of what you do. That's your job, listening to your stakeholders. Can you go a little farther with that? What does that mean, and how does that look on maybe a day-to-day basis, but also how does that maybe bring you two together? How do you two intersect? It's sort of personalized. Listen to stakeholders. I noticed Sam had a question. How do you determine who gets a voice? It's a lot of stakeholders, some of whom are very well informed, some not so much. How do you do? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can start, and James, feel free to jump in. And I think every state and community is different, but I work a lot in Illinois, right? Sunrun is active, so maybe we can use that as an example. But when Sunrun is looking to, even just on how we grow our company and our employees in Illinois, like it took a lot to develop the first legislation that really ramped up solar in Illinois. And so that was in 2016, which was called the Future Energy Jobs Act. A good portion of that was the first of its kind, the second of its kind, maybe in the country behind California, but I think it's really been effective, is the Illinois Solar for All program, which has a jobs training component. And it was not Sunrun coming in, even though we hire, right? Or the industry coming in and saying, okay, here's what we need. It really was first listening to the goals of frontline community groups. And, we don't necessarily, it's not necessarily James or I deciding who's at the table. I think, like you said, Eric, there are some stakeholders, some organizations, trade associations that are always at the table or want to be at the table. I think there are some that haven't been at the table that we can say make room for. And because, we want to make sure that our policies are inclusive. And what that means is that it takes time, and it takes, first things first is of listening and not necessarily coming in with the solutions. So specifically on the job training, right? It's looking at, well, what do community organizations? It would be really easy to say, this is the training that you have required in Illinois, or this is the pathway that you go to become an installer, or if you want to get more information. But what the Future Energy Jobs Act did was it allowed different organizations who never touched solar panels, never did training before, to be able to offer accredited training programs. Because Chicago Urban League, Austin People's Action Center, Blacks in Green, Elevate, they have relationships in the communities that they serve, right? And so those those were the best organizations to say, we want to make sure that individuals in those communities have opportunities for these career paths that are now in Illinois. So that's just to get to the specifics. That's an example. I don't know, James, if you want to add to some of your experience in Illinois.
Yeah, no, that's great, Amy. No, agreed. I think, for us to, Solar for All is a great example. We, as the regulated utility, we have the obligation to serve everyone, regardless of their income level, regardless of where they're placed. So that with our actual, poles in the ground means that we are in these communities from the North Shore of Chicago to the west side of Chicago, to the far western and southern suburbs. And those are really different places. And, we've been there, and we're the first, we're called when the power is down, when there's a storm. And that gives us that connectivity with all of those people. And it's something that we remind ourselves constantly. I've only been at ComEd for about a year, and it's really important for us to remind ourselves it's kind of a sacred duty to each of those individuals and those communities that were there, and that we listen to them and we hear that. I do think that as the energy transition has gone along, we've worked, and Amy and others have worked to make sure that the table is inclusive, that we are not just, that we don't accidentally leave voices out. And I think, Eric, it's another interesting kind of, you brought it up in terms of kind of level of knowledge. Because this is such a complex space, there is this kind of chicken and an egg cycle, a positive cycle. I think that it's been over the last 5 years of listening and then educating. Because there are those who don't have as much knowledge coming in. There's some people who say, why would I care about solar jobs? What is Solar for All? What benefits does it have for me? I'm on a fixed income. I live in a house in the Chatham neighborhood. What benefits could it have for me in terms of racially equitable job training? So there's a educational aspect to how things are moving and changing, and how we hope to have things change. And then there's still the kind of the coming back with humility to say, now let me listen to you. How is this working? How are you seeing this? What can we do better? How can this be more impactful, more affordable, more fair across different types of customers? So there is that. We have to think of ourselves as trying to educate, because there's always, you push one thing and you think you're getting a good outcome. There may be unintended consequences. So we're always trying to balance that listening and educational approach. And Amy as well, and lawmakers, right? Lawmakers have gone on a big journey over the last 5-7 years in this space, and regulators have too. And it's our job to help bring our expertise humbly to to support good policy outcomes.
Well, you think about it, Eric, is that we had in Illinois in 2016, there were 1,000 solar systems total in the entire state. And James, I don't know if it's like tens of thousands at this point, I think, yeah. Right? Like there are thousands now across the state. And I think Sam had a further question about how do we make sure these jobs stay in the community. The reason and how Illinois has approached it, and how a lot of other states have approached it, is looking at a diversity of projects, what I always call the all of the above approach to getting us to clean energy. So you have utility scale wind and solar, community solar, and rooftop solar, residential and commercial and multifamily, because that's going to provide benefits to those tenants. And if you don't have that, right, that's where installs can happen. On rooftops, in communities, you can make sure you can target where those installations and where those jobs are going to be, instead of saying you have just a handful of utility scale projects downstate or something like that. You have to have a mix. Because there's benefits of all of those programs.
Yeah, and then adding last thing on local jobs too. We work very closely with the FIJA programs to help get those programs off the ground, ensure that those folks are being trained. We work with, with labor unions who have historically not been as diverse as they need to be, and we have encouraged and pushed them to diversify. And local unions have launched Hire 360 to help diversify. Again, that's local and equitable jobs. And then for ourselves, like we are holding ourselves accountable because those are local jobs, right? From line workers to call centers that we are hiring from within the communities, and we're developing a really equitable pipeline. And so again, I think it kind of comes back to, it has to be on the minds of people like me and Amy and the leaders at our companies. And again, it has to be on the minds of those around us, right? I'm sure Amy does too. We get pushed. What are your statistics? How are you doing? How is this going? Right? That accountability from citizens, from the community at large, will help hold everyone to a higher standard that we need as we are decarbonizing. The other thing that's really important too is that, again, from a policy perspective on the local side, right, is there's so many communities that are suffering from air pollution. And that was exacerbated during COVID, where communities with worse lung health outcomes already, saw the worst impacts of the coronavirus. And so the imperative to bring the benefits of clean technologies and electric vehicles and electric buses, and get coal plants offline and get other polluting plants offline in these communities, right? Like in Little Village, we have to have that lens of what's it going to mean at a local level, and what's it mean outside of energy, right? I mean, some people might think, why would the American Lung Association be involved in this space? But Amy and I work with them a ton, and the Respiratory Health Association. These are medical people, and yet they know that there are huge medical benefits, right? Which then also trickles down to lower healthcare costs, living longer, better quality of life, money in folks' pockets. So again, these systems are all stacking up, and we have to keep understanding the various feedback loops across them, but still coming back to that local lens. What is it doing for this person on this block, while still having the kind of the global macro planetary lens to how are we bringing GHGs down?
Eric, can I do just close this out before because I don't want to lose this train of thought before you jump to something else too, is on that point of that local impact. Let me give you a very specific example. I don't have the bill number in front of me, but Senator Gillibrand has introduced legislation after talking to community groups and the industry for a federal tax credit specifically targeting solar installations in the communities that have fossil fuel plants, getting at that exact same solution. How do we accelerate the retirement of fossil fuel plants? Sure, but how do you have an immediate impact? You're adding clean energy to the grid, but you're doing it in the communities that need that clean air benefit the most. So that's how tangible policy can help spur that. Now, we need it to move in DC, and we can talk about federal politics all day. But I do also want to commend ComEd and Illinois. One of the things we've all worked on is being very progressive and aggressive on making sure that we have equitable and a strong, diverse workforce in Illinois. And I think this is something that can be replicated in other states. Sunrun, we are over 40% racially and ethnically diverse. We're the first solar company to have a diversity, inclusion, and belonging director. So it's something that is at the forefront of what we do. That solar training that came out of the Future Energy Jobs Act really helped other companies also do that. But the next step, if and when legislation passes in Illinois, is sort of the next iteration of that, which will actually be requiring hiring from environmental justice communities in Illinois. So to make sure that companies that are doing business in Illinois and are benefiting from the incentives to serve the community are going to be have certain percentages to be able to hire from environmental justice communities, but then also creating funds to help companies that are minority-owned businesses get into the solar industry and start as well. So there's some additional wealth building. So it's almost like the second step of what we can do. And I'm really, really proud of how that came together here in the legislation.
So we've got questions coming in from every angle you can't even imagine. But I think that right now there are three buckets, it looks like. We've got a bucket of questions that are professional, that are interested in what you're doing and how you do it, like questions from Mirza. We have operational questions. Chadiana asked a great question. I want to get to that, but there's still more questions about this concept. This is a great, you've got a theme here, listening. And I want to provide just a little bit of context because it feels like there's still some questions that have to do with listening. Context. Energy has always been a political issue, but for the longest time it was a binary issue, right? You were either for or using less cheap but dirty fossil fuels. That was basically your option, right, for decades. And then there were few alternatives. Now the options are far more complex, more flexible, more interchangeable, and like I mentioned earlier, unrelenting all of the above considerations and the stakeholder relationships. It's not just generator and ratepayer anymore, right? It's this multi-dimensional matrix at different levels of and different considerations. So we're going to get at this listening question from a slightly different angle. I'm not saying you haven't. We just want to understand what this means more. So how about this question, Amy and James? What are the challenges to good policy? We can map out what good policy looks like, but James, you use the phrase unintended consequences. Things go bump in the night, right? What are the challenges to good policy making for both of you? And then Adele, be ready, because I want to bring you in with that. You had a listening question too, so Adele, be ready. Let's hear what they have to say about context, and then Adele.
Yeah, I think there's always a challenge of time. We don't have as much time as we would like to be thorough and patient and really run every little issue to ground and think about every little thing, because the planet is burning, because this is a clear, immediate imperative. And so how do Amy and I and our other colleagues and stakeholders across this, how do we work as efficiently and quickly together as possible? It's hard. It's really hard because of the complexities there. So time is one. Go ahead, Eric.
So James, there's an underlying cat theme throughout. All right, I want to ask you, herding cats. Who's the slowest cat? Who's the slowest cat? Just out of curiosity. I know this is terrible, James.
Who's the slowest cat?
Wait, are you asking us to name names? Is that
No. We want to understand, what is the policy making process?
Well, I think I'll abstract a little bit from slowest cat, but to that, the other pressure is that lawmakers have a lot on their plates. There's a lot of priorities to get across, right? And so, again, I'm not saying that lawmakers are the slowest cat, but getting that cat who is looking at 5 different shiny toys, right, to focus on the one toy and to get it, through the maze or whatever the right analogy is, that's hard. And that's something that literally Sunrun and ComEd and others, from the day almost that the Future Energy Jobs Act passed, all of us were kind of back at the table saying, okay, well, what's next, right? Because it takes time and effort to say, that there's a will, that there's enough consensus, that something can get done. The political side is a challenge, and finding ways to make it easy to act and simple. And again, as we've still seen in Illinois, it's still been harder than we thought, right? Amy and I, going into Labor Day or Memorial Day weekend, thought, we were pretty close to a bill being passed, and it needed to be passed, and it's still not. So there is like that, there's that lawmaker side as well. And then there's just the challenge on the unintended consequences side of everyone, each of the stakeholders, right, has a specific thing that he or she is really optimizing for. And what are the compromises? Where can we agree? Where can someone, where do we find an unintended consequence that everyone agrees is an issue? Like maybe it's affordability, and that, the have-nots, if you will, the people who don't have, who are lower income, don't have the access and the capital to buy all of these things, right? They're subsidizing those who are, right? And they're subsidizing decarbonization. There's obviously a certain level where we all need to pay for cleaner energy and cleaner power, but what's the best ways to do that? and it gets messy, and we have to just keep listening to each other and trying, which gets back to the time thing, which gets back to the political challenge as well. So they all fit together. Amy, you should go too.
Yeah, no, and I'd maybe, you know, disagree about the subsidy piece, right? Where there's utility models that show investing in local solar plus storage nationally can save us $500 billion by 2050. And so there like, even if communities or even if individuals rent or don't have a home where they can invest in solar, do see a benefit, right, on the lower costs by having these investments added to the grid. But the unintended consequences of this policy legislation, a lot of states have the percentage goals. 25 by 25, 30 by 2030, 100% by 2050 for clean energy. That's great. Even Biden, right? President Biden has ambitious goals to have 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. The question I think that happens then is the unintended consequences are not how do we make that happen? And what happens by setting those goals? And so then we enter regulatory proceedings. So we go to public service commissions in different states where we argue about what is the specific best rate design, right, to get it right for commercial companies, for residential customers, for community solar, and what is that best design, in which can take an additional 2 years to be able to develop what that design is. Or then we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars arguing about that when we just, you know, I'm impatient, like we just need to get moving and be able to install that. I think that's where things can kind of break down, is in that regulatory framework of what are the other rules for interconnection, for rate design. And there could really be a benefit to encourage and require utilities in the industry to work together in what's called sort of a regulatory sandbox. So you can experiment with new ideas, especially with storage and electrification and electric vehicles. Like, we need to have all of those pieces working really well together to make sure we are electrifying everything, but we're putting on solar. So loosening up those rules of what have traditionally just been the generator ratepayer experience. And then the one other quick one, we can come back to this, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, because honestly, this is where we're going to see the most cost reductions and increased access for solar, is on the soft cost. So the sexy world of permitting and interconnection that are the unintended consequences. We talked about, as more and more people are able to install solar and batteries, especially our experience in Texas and in California, people are clamoring for that resiliency. Every single city and village and county has different types of permitting rules and different types of requirements. And some of those processes can take a really long time. And so there's initiatives across the country to move our permitting online so it can be really quick and save a lot of money. We have full-time people in Illinois, and this is no offense to DuPage County, I'm just going to use them as an example. If we want to install a solar system on someone's house in DuPage County, we have a full-time person that goes in person, gets in line, it goes to the front of the line, gets one permit, and then if she was there to get two, she goes to the back of the line to be able to go get a second permit and has to go there in person. This is after COVID, right? Like, we should be able to adapt and help and lower those costs and kind of speed this up a little bit. Those are some of those weird unintended consequences that aren't good sound bites necessarily.
Amy and James, thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't say what I'm hearing. The policymaking process is really, really hard. And I think if I could say, the audience forget, we forget. It's funny, when I think back to all the conversations we have, we want capitalism to be fair and we want democracy to be faster. What you're both doing is very, very hard. And that permitting example, Amy, thank you very much. It is a hard process. Adele, you had a question. Isra, it continues. We're going to move away from, there's a little bit more on the listening theme, but I think that the two fellows had two questions that come at different angles. Adele, you want to go first, and then Isra, you'll be next.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Amy and James, for speaking about this. I had a quick question regarding strategies you all have used to not only reach out to these more disenfranchised communities, but to identify them. When you talk about like going into communities and listening to the needs of the people in these areas, I was curious how you're able to quantify that. Are there different priorities for certain metrics that you go out and survey? I don't know if there's surveys that are sent out, and then I feel like there's a lot of layers of issues to surveys as well, because then there gets into the weeds of who has access to internet, if it's submitted online, and all of these other criteria. So I was just curious if y'all had any strategies related to that.
So I'll go one strategy, Adele. It's a great question. It's a challenging one, and I certainly am not an expert on all of those things. I'd have to get some of my colleagues on the phone from our customer organization who are really, receiving calls from customers, surveying them, whether it's in person or not, to get into kind of some of that depth of the data science and survey design. But one anecdote I think that's representative of our approach has been what we've taken with the Bronzeville community of the future. So there are these, there's concepts of microgrids. I don't know if you guys have heard of them, but again, broadly about making the grid smarter and better able to integrate renewables and provide real-time digital benefits, going from this analog piece of machinery, that's been around for 100 years to something really digital that can integrate renewables and EVs and make sure all of those things are uptime, right? Those are the kinds of investments we've been looking at across our system to support customers and bring outages down and integrate, all the Sunrun, batteries and solar that are out there and coming, right? So in Bronzeville, we came at it a little bit from an engineering side, Department of Energy grants, how are we going to test this microgrid? There's interesting technological things to test around controllers and software. And, we've got a big Tesla battery on site, and how do we work with Tesla, right? All of these technical things, but which is cool for, best nerds on earth on one side of the nerdy side. But then the sociological side was really interesting in the community side, because we had all of these listening sessions with members of Bronzeville, a neighborhood that, has historically been underinvested in, just a little north of where I live. And they said, actually, the most important thing to them was not necessarily clean technology. It was really jobs. It was really about how are these investments going to lead to jobs in our community. And so we had to, and the smart grid came out of the Future Energy Jobs Act as well, which we keep talking about. But it helped us, I think, and helped all of the different parts of ComEd that work with customers in different ways and work on these things, change how we're approaching it, and what kinds of, again, we might not have proposed certain types of investments or certain ways to link it all together with that jobs lens. But now our teams are looking at making sure we're thinking about the jobs modeling, following through on what it translates to jobs and local economic dollars and supply chain and everything else there, because that was the number one priority for the community, was the job. So I think a lot of it, I think, is back to your point on access. It's got to be kind of that in-person, boots on the ground. I work a lot, and I have history with another organization, the Chicago Bungalow Association, that does a lot of work on the south and west sides with income qualified homeowners that do energy efficiency retrofits. And their big thing is, you got to be there. The community has to trust you. They have to know that you're not just parachuting in and out like so many have over so many years. And that takes time. And it's not a scalable thing, right? I think big tech, all of us like those fast, amazingly scalable solutions. It's not, I don't know that we've yet found those perfectly scalable things when it comes to these communities, certainly not in energy, right? And that's where, Sunrun, ComEd, others, like, we just have to be there. We have to be present. We have to show up, and we have to keep listening and show that we're listening by acting on what we're hearing.
Yeah, and I wish it was more scientific, like you said, as far as surveys and things like that. But honestly, that is exactly where we start. As James mentioned, we first look at what are the markets that we're serving, and where do we exist, and where are those career opportunities. and what can we support in a community first and foremost. So it's not just parachuting in, it's creating longer partnerships and getting that trust and partnership. We Act is a good example in New York, and Rising Sun in Oakland, and being able to support the organizations, listen and figure out what the goals are, but then really what we've seen too is that focus on career opportunities and figuring out a way where we can create a pipeline into our jobs and our career opportunities, whether that's on the sales side, on the design side in the warehouse, or on the install side, and being able just to educate about the opportunities, and then partnering on projects. So we also, I think it's also just using our national partnerships. We're one of the founding members of the NAACP's Solar Equity Initiative. And NAACP is very clear on it is driven from their local chapters and what the goals are. And so then if there's projects like in Laredo or the church in just outside of Detroit, those are the projects that those chapters want to work on, and we will support that. It is not trying to direct, hey, this is what Sunrun wants to do. We got a great idea, and really being supportive. And honestly, the other piece I would say of how we think about reaching traditionally underrepresented communities, or how we have been able to do that, has been in partnership with supportive utilities. And it has really been helpful. You know, the Illinois Solar for All program is targeted to low-income residents, but there's also this job training program that's run through ComEd with organizations in different communities around Chicagoland. But another example is working with utility out in Oakland. We created, working with the utility, a virtual power plant, which the utility in Oakland was able to retire a diesel jet fuel peaking power plant, which was awful in a community that did not deserve to have that plant. And so what we did is, instead of the utility closing that or developing a natural gas plant, for example, right, to replace that, instead, we brought financing to the table. They brought financing to the table. We invested then in solar and storage on low income homes in that direct community. And those homes have clean power, they have backup power. And then when the utility needs peak power, when they're like, oh, we've hit a peak day where demand is high, they send us a signal, we dispatch power from those batteries, from those thousands of batteries on the homes, to be able to help the utility meet their needs. That is how we're going to get to 100% clean energy. We're going to have to be able to utilize all of those solutions. It's not going to be one, large storage system on the grid or one project. It's going to be able to have those, but then also aggregate and use the solar and storage on all these homes. And that's a great example of, here's where we targeted a specific solution because we partnered with the utility.
So we're never going to get to all. This is phenomenal. This is phenomenal. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. Isra had a great question about education, the listening and the education component, but we got to get to some of these technical questions now. Chetyana had a question about the duck curve, worried about the duck curve. Shashwat had a concern about the Midwest and cloudy days. Jennifer has a question about storage, but I'm going to, so the technical questions are coming in, but Utsavi, are you there, Utsavi? You had a question about utility scale. Is Sunrun and ComEd, what's, obviously ComEd is thinking utility scale, but I think Utsavi, you had a question for Sunrun. Utsavi? Well, while we wait, Elaine, be ready with your individual choice question too. Amy and James, can you speak to, the duck curve and overproduction of solar at a certain time of day, or off, not balanced load? Shush. Oh, what's that, Utsavi? Utsavi, I'll try. She was asking about utility
am I audible?
scales.
Okay.
We have people from all over. So go ahead, James. Amy, why don't we do Shashwat, your cloudy day question?
Oh yeah. Yeah, my question was knowing that Illinois is cloudy like nearly half the year. Would you say that solar is still the best clean energy option for our area?
And you know what, Jennifer, can you jump in and ask a question about storage too then? Because this seems like a great opportunity to bundle that with Shashwat's.
Yeah, I was just saying that I think that highlights the need for more advanced battery storage, because I know someone else commented that a lot of it today isn't like it won't there's not really like a long time duration, which is like true, but I think that just it just overall emphasizes the need for more advanced battery storage, because if there's a really sunny day in Illinois, then we can just, if we had like a better energy storage method, then we could save it. And then when there's a cloudy day, and then like vice versa, if there's a really windy day in like some windy part of the country, and then the wind doesn't blow for like a week after, we still have the energy stored from that one really windy day.
James and Amy?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, Sashwat, I hope that it's more than half the year that's sunny. I know, like being in Milwaukee, it feels like that sometimes too, that it's not sunny enough. But really, the efficiency and the technology of the panels has been able to we've been able to bring solar to more locations. It's been able to benefit families in more locations. I mean, we're seeing utility scale development as well, right, in northern climates. But to Jennifer, to your point, storage really has unlocked the solutions for solar, and again, making it part of the mix. We're not going to have, and as a solar company, I'd love to be able to say the clean energy grid is going to be 100% rooftop residential solar. It's not, right? It needs to be that full mix, but we absolutely need to be a part of it. And our battery systems are designed, and especially when you couple them with storage, to be able to maximize those sunny days, to be able to address the duck curve, really only in those states where that's an issue, right? That's not an issue in 99.9% of the locations, because we are still on the very low side, 1%, 2%. In a lot of states, 0.1% in Wisconsin, I'll tell you that, of capacity. So we've got a long way to go. But storage allows you that flexibility. So in California, you can use that solar plus storage. Now you respond to time of use rates. Now you're able to make sure those customers are only using power when it's least expensive, or when the utilities are demanding it, right? Like there are opportunities there for that solar and storage. It doesn't necessarily have the day-long capacity. That's why we pair it with storage. So we use Tesla Powerwalls and LG Chem. We're always looking for what is coming next in the technology. And then the other piece of that, for the resiliency, right? We don't have time. We need to have that resiliency for homeowners. The other piece of that is electric vehicles. And I don't want to take anything away from the next panels. Sunrun announced earlier this year its partnership with Ford on its F-150 Lightning. That will be the first electric vehicle of its kind, that in addition to your solar being able to charge your electric vehicle, that in a backup, that battery in your truck can also provide backup power in event that the grid goes down for a weather-related event, for example. So now that starts to really change the game and gets engineers thinking about what's possible in the long run, to be able to add that resiliency. Again, I'm kind of sort of focused on that customer-sided solar and storage, and I think there are definitely challenges and opportunity on the utility scale side too. But it's also balancing the comments of what happens in your backyard, right? The added transmission, that takes a long time to build transmission lines, and a lot of backyards that has to go through. So there's going to be a lot of issues where we could be deploying right away too. So it really is going to be a mix. I don't know, James, any thoughts on what you guys have experienced from?
Building on that, as Amy said, we're not dealing with the duck curve here, but a lot of our analysis over this past year is really how do we most economically decarbonize the power sector. And it starts with actually that Illinois, and Northern Illinois in particular, have a huge clean energy advantage. We have carbon-free power available for 96% of the time that customers need it, when customers need it, right? load goes up and down. A lot of that is base load nuclear energy, which some people are, really believe that has to be part of the mix. Other people, are more conflicted about nuclear. The reality is it is decarbonized. It's huge output that can cover a lot of people's needs. And then on top of that is rooftop solar and utility scale solar and wind in Northern Illinois. Then as you get down into it, okay, well, how do we go from 96% to 100%? And how do we take off the rest of the greenhouse gas emitting and polluting generation? What you look at actually is it's in those summer months when coal and natural gas are coming online to serve summer peaks. And that's where actually solar is a perfect fit. Rooftop solar, utility scale solar are perfect fits in Northern Illinois to get customers what they need when it's sunny, when your air conditioning is running, and it works together really well. So here, our analysis of what's most cost effective, right? Because we're trying to make sure that customers' rates are not going too high, right? We could, whether it's infinity transmission lines like Amy talked about, or all batteries, like there are very expensive solutions that might be out there. So what are the creative, cost-effective ones? And really, preserving nuclear and then adding solar in Northern Illinois. That's really one of the, and then the grid itself, right? Jennifer, to your point, right? Your local distribution grid and the existing transmission grid are all very helpful to move power where you need it, when you need it, right? That was a big issue that we saw in Texas, is Texas didn't have the ability to bring power from other parts of the country that had power to export. Illinois is an exporter of power. We could have exported power to Texas, but they weren't interconnected to our grids and they couldn't take that, which would have helped during the horrible events this winter. So the grid itself is kind of a nice battery and great backup system that brings the power to everyone when they need it, right? I'm running my laundry machine, but Amy's producing solar. Great, Amy, send your electrons my way via the grid. Thank you. But so again, like each of those different systems, you got to look at it differently. And so we're a big fan of solar and storage and the existing clean energy resources we have, plus the resilient digital grid to connect all of these pieces together. And we think that's how we can most quickly and cost effectively and equitably get to a totally clean power sector here in Northern Illinois. But each area is different. Each area is looking at a different mix of things. Some places, more wind is better. Some places have hydro. I saw a comment on hydro. There's all, everywhere has to be kind of, looked at differently.
Your comment, James, about, and Amy, you were implying it too, all these choices in the context of an economic, context, right? How do we, what's the most effective? Because a lot of these questions about lithium and storage and pumped hydro there's no one solution. Is that what you're both saying? I mean, there's no one solution.
That's right. And there's no one solution. It takes everyone working on, how to improve those different areas. And we don't have time to wait for the best solution, right? I worked at a nonprofit 15 years ago where a lot of it was on training and development and thinking about that research. And it's like, well, I think the best panels are coming, so we're just going to wait, right? That was 15. We have some of the solutions here. Might we get something better later on? Absolutely. But in the meantime, we've got batteries that work. We've got solar. We need to make it accessible. And I think one of the traps we do get into is how you define what's economical for the grid and for ratepayers, and getting out of that old paradigm of what's the cheapest in the next 2 years. Instead of thinking about, we're putting these resources on, what does that mean for a benefit for the next 30 years? Because the solar and storage will be on that. And how then do we encourage ratepayer or rate makers, our commissions and utilities, to think about how to best maximize that? I think just being able to get out of that framework helps open up the doors to try, to get a move on.
We're going to have to, yeah. And Amy, thank you so much, because I think all of the above, you'd love to have it all be Sunrun's business model, but it's all, you're saying it is all of the above. I do want to there were a couple professional questions I really want to get to. Fizz, I was going to hopefully, Fizz, be ready. I want to use your question as the last question. James, do you want to just take, there's the classic question from Chania. I'm just going to summarize. Do you want to just take a quick response to this one. It's the one that we hear a lot. The business model of utilities make money by selling more. Do you want to just might as well address that, and then we'll move to the professional. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, and it's a great policy question because the utility business model, right? That regulatory compact, we're a monopoly because it's not cost effective to have two grids. Neither one makes enough money to survive, right? So you need one grid, but you need to regulate it so that you're not, being a monopolist in the Standard Oil sense of the word and gouging people, right? So, but how do you evolve that so that incentives are aligned and it can be really effective and fast and cost effective and provide good benefits of all different kinds, right? As Amy said, like there's long-term, there's a lot of different things to look at. So two big pieces of legislation passed in Illinois changed how ComEd makes money. One, it decouples our money from the sale of electricity. So if the kilowatt hours that go through our system and that we sell go down, we don't make any less money. So therefore we have an incentive or we don't have a disincentive to have energy efficiency, which is a huge piece in the toolkit as well. And Illinois has made a ton of progress on energy efficiency. So we're decoupled from that. Basically, every year we say, here are our costs, and the commission reviews it and stakeholders look at it, and Amy and others look at it and say, this project seems too expensive, right? There's a very robust stakeholder process, and in the coming energy legislation, if it passes, knock on wood, it'll keep getting more innovative and more robust on that, and increasingly geared towards how are we connecting solar and EVs and all of that stuff. But our costs are reviewed, and then things that are not allowable are tossed out, and then that's all totaled up into an amount of money that then gets charged to customers through rates. So that's kind of the evolution of the business model one. The second is that now there's increasing performance incentive mechanisms that some of those were introduced under FEJA too, where ComEd can get a penalty or make money depending on how we perform on certain KPIs, like how often a year your house is out of power, how long that lasts. Some of the ones, some big businesses want moment that matters, like power quality of this thing, so that they have really good power, really stable coming into their manufacturing facility. That's an important one. Interconnection, right? D&I KPIs. There's all sorts of different ones being looked at, so that again, it's not just about the dollars moving and the investments, but it's about how are these investments going towards a better future. So it continues to evolve, and we're a big believer that it needs to continue to evolve, and we have to keep making it work. And there's things that we can't do right now, back to Amy's point, because of the existing regulatory process and the commission and the way things work, that could be win-wins for a lot of us, right? So we have to keep experimenting and trying new ways of having utilities be at the core of it. Sierra Club, for instance, just said that utilities are the cornerstone to decarbonization and fighting climate change, which is why I'm at a utility. Like, part of me would, be at a Sunrun or at a nonprofit, right? Because I'm deeply mission driven by all this stuff. But I'm at a utility because I believe we have to be a good, partner for Amy and the rest in this. But we've got to have the business model and the regulation continue to change.
So thank you, James. So we're going to go over, but two questions. One, I want to get the professional question. Mirza, Sam, Adele, number of them asked professional questions. I'm going to ask Paritosh, you had a question about what's the next opportunity for early stage energy professionals. Where would you start thinking if you wanted to get ahead for tomorrow? Paritosh, where are you? Paritosh. Okay, Paritosh. Well, Amy and James, while we wait for Paritosh, the question is, help us get ahead. Where should we start planning if we wanted to go into a field like your own? Where's the professionally, what should I do if I were their age? I'm an old guy.
James, do you have any suggestions? Do you want to start? Otherwise, I can start with some suggestions. I would say connect with folks on LinkedIn for sure. So feel free to find me and others at Sunrun on LinkedIn, join different groups. There are organizations like WeRise, WRISE, which is for women in renewable energy. Different types of trade associations like that that are member driven can be really helpful because they'll host different events. And now that folks can meet in person, that can become really helpful. Honestly, I have not experienced this. There are a number of professional opportunities within the industry, within trade association organizations, and within nonprofits. So I think getting different types of experiences and just starting to work on what you're passionate about. When I started working in renewable energy, I was not an attorney. I knew I had wanted to go back to law school and then work in policy, but I was able to kind of keep going with that passion. So I, honestly, just looking for those opportunities.
And Amy, Ashley had a question. And if they were interested in solar specifically, what would you do? There was a technical question from Ashley, but I'm sorry, Ashley, I just jumped in. Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I think the Solar Energy Industries Association is a good place to connect. There's a couple of groups on LinkedIn, and that's a good question. But if you're a female, I think the Women in Renewable Energy is a good connection to solar as well.
James, where would you look? How would you help me prepare for my professional career?
Network, like Amy said. I think it's a hard challenge then to find kind of within the space what kind of function you want to perform. And I've performed a lot of different functions, so I can talk all about that hunt. And when I was 22, I thought I wanted to do a certain thing, and I'm doing something totally different now. So I think there's an experimentation side, trying things. And there's so many different types of really fun, interesting jobs, but it's got to be that individual fit, right? Do you like policy or does it bore you? Would you rather be in marketing? Are you an engineer at heart? Do you want to work on the engineering side, technology side? And then there's do you go to a bigger company? Do you go to a startup? Do you go to a nonprofit? There's so many different places. So I think continuing to talk to people, learn how, she or he has approached career, and finding what's a right fit for you and where you feel most excited. I do, as I've approached career decisions, I've tried to look at where am I going to have the biggest impact? Who are the people I'm working with? I think that's one that often people can forget, that your team and your work is your family. So important to work with people you like. And where will I be stimulated to enjoy it? But it's a lot of different places one can go, which is exciting. And again, the career options today are way, way, way better than they were, 15 years ago when Amy and I were getting a start in the space, because so many things were so new and so many things were so struggling. And now there's such momentum behind the energy transition.
Thank you, James. Network. Amy says LinkedIn, probably item number one. Okay, so we're going to go full circle back to that listen and educate question issue. Fizz, I thought your question was great about bad policy or new policy. Fizz, do you mind asking that question? I just thought that this could be a great wrap up.
Sure. So my question is, where do you see more challenges, changing existing bad policies or creating new ones, which are more consumer friendly? Because in either way, someone would be the beneficiary and others won't be. So where's the most risk?
Man, that is a good question. Yeah, go ahead, James.
I think what's interesting for me and Amy is a lot of times they're together. So it's hard to totally parse them. That being said, I think, and we're seeing this in Northern Illinois, when there's existing policy that creates an entitlement, an asset, cash flows, a reason for someone to want to protect something versus doing something net new, that's a harder thing to get out of, right? So in Northern Illinois, the bill that's on the table would shut down natural gas and coal-fired power plants at certain points in time. That means those jobs at those plants are going away. That means construction jobs related to building those types of plants are going away. That means the money to the people that own those plants is going away, right? And so taking those economic interests away from people is hard, versus creating a net new thing like Solar for All in 2016, when there weren't really losers per se, right? And so I think where now again though, like, that's the lower hanging fruit. That's the easier stuff. That's the more fun stuff. People get excited about it, we're running through that. And so the harder policies are coming in. And this is what we're seeing certainly at the federal level around federal carbon policy, right? A federal carbon tax might be a really efficient way to do it, but someone's going to have to pay for, there's going to be losers in that system. So the bigger the losers are, the louder they are, the harder it is to get things done. So where can you either minimize it, find ways for them to win, right? Amy talked about Senator Gillibrand's thing. There's a lot of energy just transition provisions in the Illinois bill to help communities that are losing coal plants and natural gas plants so that they win too. So it's those kind of creative solutions that trying to think about it from that winning perspective. And that's what's so great about the Green New Deal and the way Biden and Vice President Harris are talking about all of this stuff is it's jobs, it's American leadership. It's good for consumers like the stuff. It's affordable. Like there's so many benefits versus framing it from the negative side. So the more Amy and I and our colleagues can try to look at the positives and create better positives, the more likely I think we are to get good policy.
Well, and work together. So I feel like you've heard James and I, singing from the same hymnal, so to speak, as far as we have to work together, right? That it's going to take the utilities are the backbone of being able to deploy the variety of solutions, including aggregated, rooftop solar and batteries and electrification. This relationship does not exist in a lot of states. So the reality is you look, getting rid of that bad policy, in my mind, from my perspective, is transitioning from this bad policy of the utilities are the only ones that have the solution, are the only ones that can own generation, are the only ones that get to make the investments or benefit from it, to shifting to how do we not only encourage, but make utilities see where the future is going. So members of traditionally underrepresented communities, so individuals it's not just power to the people, right? It's power from the people. And it's making sure that there are benefits that then everyone on the grid can use. So there's lots of, I work in lots of states around the country. Michigan's a perfect example where the utilities are saying, well, we want to try a storage pilot to see if people want storage. And we're going to invest, the utility will own 100 batteries and get those to customers. We're like, we can do that faster, cheaper, and still work with the utilities at a lower risk to ratepayers. This is not just allowing, utilities necessarily to control the spigot of who gets to benefit from this clean energy future. And so I think where, that conversation about that business model becomes really important in states where you all are going to work, that's going to encourage the necessary partnership for the market, because we can drive things quickly, but also work in partnership with utilities, whether that's a deregulated state or a regulated state. So that's sort of the bad policy, I would say, that keeps us entrenched in that old model of winners and losers.
But that's great, and I think thank you, Amy, for that. And it sounds to me that we can't lump it. Utilities are not monolithic. Some utilities like ComEd listen better than others, and that's where we want to focus. So Fizz, I think it was both, but you just have to think through which one are we talking about instead of all, is what I'm hearing. Okay, that's it. I can't. When we talk offline, I'll share some of the many questions we get to. Phenomenal. Thank you. Just absolutely tremendous. Thomas, James, Amy, thank you. Wow.
Thanks for having us. Great discussion. Thanks for the good questions and engagement.